Do I look like someone you should listen to? You shouldn't. So warning, everything I'm about to say is opinion. This is very different from facts, because I have no evidence to base it off of. Instead, I'm just going off of my own perspective. So, if it sounds like fact and you want to believe it, do your own research. Maybe you can. But not because you heard it from me. I'm an asshat. Do you see this? This is to show you that no matter how suave I look and or sound, I'm just an asshat underneath. So, do your own research and enjoy. Trigger warning, religious discussion ahead.
Where you from? What we doing here? Where you from? Ex Matres.
Is there a way that someone, one person, one individual, could speak to the rest of humanity, to those who share this world with me at this point in time? Well, technology says yes. We have the internet. We have the ability to take several pictures of my face and recordings of my audio, put them together, and I can put them on the internet and share them with everybody. Wow. Way to go, dude. You found out some cool stuff. I know. This is my hope. My hope is for this to be kind of like a soapbox where I stand on the street corner on my soapbox speaking, but loud enough, and not so loud that it's annoying, but loud enough that everybody could hear me. That is what I hope this is. And my intent is to focus on a very specific point. Trigger warning. The focus of this channel will be solely on religion. And I understand it is something that we have come to associate with ourselves. It is one of the largest puzzle pieces that make up the complex us, the complex you. And in this journey of life, some of us go from beginning to end as a devoted believer. And I guess in the very beginning, you're a child. Anyhow. But we go through our entire life with faith, and we're able to lead a pretty good life. Doesn't necessarily take away too much. It doesn't. So, from our own perspective, faith can be awesome. And it absolutely can be. My focus will be more on the people that instituted that faith. The ones who used the story specifically of Genesis to manipulate our understanding of this universe, of this world, and our place in it. And it doesn't matter which nation you come from. If you fall under the purview of those who believe in Genesis, I am speaking to you. And I was a person of faith. This is how I was born. I was born into a family of the faith. And I built it into myself, as many of us do. It's how I learned about the world. It's how I learned about how I should be relating to one another, or how I should be relating to others. As far as responsibilities, what my duties are. And it wasn't the worst. The only problem that I had with it was that when it came time for me to lean on that faith, for it to be something that was there, something that was able to offer me support, it wasn't. And I recognized that I could be unique. But after I finally hit what I would consider to be my own personal rock bottom, I started to become very analytical towards everything. I was trying to build back not only my understanding of the universe and my place in it, but who was I? I had built so much of myself off of faith that now that faith wasn't there, and I recognized that to me, it was not what it was said to have been, not all that it was lauded as. I was lost. And so while I recognize that this is going to be very offensive to some people, because I see that it will appear as though I am trying to take something away from you. My hope is that you will understand that I'm not here to take anything away from you. I am here to provide the understanding that I have found. And I could be wrong. I am 100% open up to being incorrect. The reason why I would like to speak to everybody that shares this world with me is because there's bound to be somebody out there that has a better perspective, a more correct opinion than I have. But I'm not able to call each and every single one of you to figure out who that person is, how it is that we can learn. So, my side hope was to basically start the conversation, to bring people in so that I could learn. I'm not here to make money. I'm not here to be famous. I'm here to learn. I'm here to share. But I'm also here to be shared with. So I understand that while people will be offended, and there will most likely be lots of people who are sending all sorts of wonderful letters, I'm not here representing an organization. I'm not here representing a group. I'm here representing one man's opinion, one man's perspective. My hope is to put something out there that people have the option of listening to. But you also have the option of not listening, not watching. If this is something that does not interest you, by all means, please excuse yourself. If ever you find yourself in a point where you too have tried to rely upon faith and you found yourself falling, that may be a time to come back. But if you've lost somebody, and right now you need that belief in everything that you've been told, this may not be the time to listen, to watch. That's okay. No one is trying to rush anybody. No one's trying to force anything on anyone. This is simply me having enough in my own life of not fully understanding, of not having someone directly in my life with whom I may have this conversation with. And yes, I could go out and I could go from university to university and I could be starting email chains, and that's just not who I am, I guess. So this is my hope, to put myself out there in the hopes of learning, but definitely in the hopes of sharing. It will be slightly therapeutic for me. I come from a very religious family where faith is the guiding compass. It is the guiding light. So if somebody who is asking questions that are outside of the purview of faith, that faith doesn't necessarily have the ability to answer, I fluster people. It started to appear as though people were thinking that I was trying to convince them not to believe. Not at all. I was merely trying to find out if somebody else had gone through the same moments I was going through. If they possibly had an answer that drew them back. I don't know. I didn't know. But I did the best that I could, and I've come up with the answer that I believe is correct. It also, unfortunately, is an answer that completely undoes the story of Genesis. To me, it proves it to be a horrible, horrible manipulation, where a simple story that was supposed to offer us our first understanding of this place, this shared existence, kind of flipped the understanding that we did have, because humans were on our way of learning. It flipped that understanding on its head and has confused us all. Even those who are already outside of faith. We still live in a world where faith is such a strong influence in so many different aspects. Here in the United States, we're going through all sorts of issues. It's race, it's politics, it's, social justice versus, in my personal opinion, the only reason we're having these conversations is because it all goes back to faith. It goes back to this single story that tells us there is someone who knows the right answer. There is a plan. You may not know it. You may not understand it, but there is a plan. Trust the plan. And it's terrifying. We've gone through countless leaders, be it kings and queens. Not today, kings and queens, your majesty, your highness, however that goes. Obviously, I'm only talking about the olden time kings and queens. Did that work? What? There's no one here? I'm talking to myself? Cool. We recognized long ago that the story was being used as a manipulation, a way for someone to claim the right to the resources that are supposed to be for all of us. The land, the air, the animals, the labor, the very people. We too have been deemed resources. It is going to be very uncomfortable. I am not working off of a script. I'm not going off of any kind of huge overarching plan. My generalized plan is to share what it is that I've discovered in as kind a way as possible so as not to be judgmental to others. Because I recognize that those with faith, like all of us, have the ability to be the best among us. We also have the ability, every single one of us, to be the worst of us. That's in all of us. Some call it the tale of the two wolves. There's the two souls. No, I guess two souls. Never mind. The tale of the two wolves. The idea that it's, there's a big wolf and a little wolf, and whichever one's going to win, because one is more greedy and one is more helpful. Whichever wins is the one you feed more. The idea is that it's who we choose to be. The reason I find myself in this position is because I was a believer. I led myself to believe that I was already a person who was good. That the actions that I could do, even if they were bad, they could be good. I have since learned my lesson, and that is what caused me to try and lean on faith in the beginning. That wasn't there, and I fell. Whew. And people may wonder, well, if you have decided that faith is not something that works for you, why would you ever come out and try and convince others not to have faith? And that's a fair point. But I must reiterate, I am not trying to convince others not to have faith. I am simply going to describe what I have discovered. Because here in the United States, I don't know how it is elsewhere in the world. Unfortunately, I don't have that perspective. The options kind of are, well, you believe in the plan that is established and it's in the good book and so on and so forth, or you find yourself as an atheist or an agnostic, someone who has the generalized idea that, that we're just molecules floating around with no guidance, no plan. But like many of the options that are given to us, it's a false option. It's not just A or B. It can be C. You can be part of these stardust molecules just floating around in space that also have a plan, that also have morals that are in your very fiber. They didn't come from some heavenly body above. Where do we get our morals? Well, I don't know. I suppose it comes from someone who happened to care for you when you were completely infantile, when you had no ability to care for yourself. Yes, we learn very early on to treat others as we want to be treated. But when we are young, we are kind of selfish. But we learn that there are others around us. We're not alone in this world. We have to think about those who we will directly affect. We have to think of those whom we are responsible for. Every action has a reaction and a consequence and blah, blah, blah. I'm a huge fan of the Allegory of the Spoons. If you're not aware of it, it's the story that basically, it's a very loose summarization, but someone was able to basically visit both heaven and hell. And then somehow they're basically being asked what they witnessed. And they recognize that that heaven and hell are basically the same thing. It's a whole bunch of people sitting around this table, loaded with food. Beautiful, wonderful food. But the only tools they have with which to eat that beautiful, wonderful food are utensils, generally a spoon, that's too long for an individual to feed themselves. So they have something to eat with, and apparently it's all they can eat with, but they can't get it to their own face. The difference being is in heaven, they're using their spoons to feed their neighbor or the person across from them. And because everybody's feeding somebody else, everybody's well fed, happy, and having a wonderful time. In hell, the spoons are being used selfishly. Each person is only trying to feed themselves and failing. So they're in front of all this marvelous food, but unable to eat, unable to enjoy it, and they're starving. Yeah, I kind of see that in the world. That we're kind of turning the world into more of a hell because we're being selfish than we are a heaven. Yet all of us, almost every single one of us, is a fan of the idea of heaven, of there being enough, of there being this idea of a utopia, some kind of happiness that, is too good by all means to exist within this reality. But if we work really hard, sometimes if we step on, the hands of others, the toes of others, we might earn that just reward. But it's also no coincidence that the whole time we might have to pay a certain percentage, to behave in a certain way, to continue the tradition of seeing the world through a certain lens, where there's a certain hierarchy, and that hierarchy, above all else, must be respected. And in the end, that there's always a plan. It may not make sense, but mysterious ways and all. So, if faith is what you love, if that is how you've come to define yourself, by all means, please, this will not be a place for you. But for those who are having a hard time feeling as though faith is what provides everything, that you feel as though there's still something lacking, this may be for you. But it's also going to be pretty awkward. It's going to be uncomfortable. Unfortunately, I'm feeling a bit apocalyptic. Not in the fact that I'm going to do anything crazy, but just that it's starting to feel as though the clock is ticking. There's not much time for us to do something. And you could point it to climate change, you could point to our international relations, you could point to whatever. But it all kind of boils down to us being, in the allegory of spoons, we're down using our spoons selfishly. There are those who are trying to, again, just mine those resources with no real regard for the cost. And we follow along because that's the narrative that we've been sold. That's the story that we are all a part of. It's unfortunately a game that's been going on long before we came to be. Meaning you and I as individuals, obviously not humanity. But I guess it's not obvious, which is why I clarified. But if you were like me and you believe that faith is great, and if I were to ask you who or how did your family come to be faithful? So yes, I recognize that a lot of us get it handed down from our parents or our guardians. How did that start? If you're like me, you might have believed that, it might have been something along the lines of, a person who was like a missionary came into town, and one of my ancestors from back in the day probably overheard the story, and they were like, bing, light on top of my head. That totally applies to everything that I am thinking about. That answers all my questions, and that's what I'm going to select as the faith that I choose. But it's not how we all kind of started, unfortunately. The faith that we now hold dear to our heart as something that has been passed down from generation to generation, because it has, started off most likely as something that was forced upon one of our ancestors. Somebody who was using the story itself to say that they were in charge, that they had the deed from the Lord, that this was their land, and all the people that existed here and all the animals or whatnot fell under their control. And they used an iron fist. Well, you don't think that this story is true? Okay, well, what kind of punishment do we have? And it's not like nowadays where they just got thrown in jail. That would have been nice. But like even continuing today, whenever one of us, the common folk, the peasants, the people who are not in control of anything except their own lives and our own choices, when we step out of line, we're generally made an example of. Which is kind of goofy. I mean, it should be a very clear sign that someone's trying to show us, like back in the day when they would burn somebody at the stake, or they would flay someone, or they would torture them out in the town square, trying to get them to unsay whatever they said was true before. Oh, this person's saying that religion's not real? My claim to this dominion is not true? Okay. Well, now I'm going to bring him out. I'm going to set him on a table. I'll give some guy a whole bunch of tools. We're going to go to work on this fella. Eventually, we'll stop and give him what we consider to be a quick death. If he says, no, the king does have a claim. He is the correct ruler. Cool. You served your purpose, example. Sunk. Now we're just going to post that head up, remind everybody, we can tell the stories. And eventually religion was just accepted, and it became the thing that you passed down to your kids. Then eventually we realized that the kings and queens of yesteryear were like, oh gosh, you've kind of been using this to manipulate, haven't us? You've been using this to manipulate us, haven't you? I do speak English. Oh yeah, absolutely. Okay. Vive la résistance! And we rebelled. But we rebelled against the leaders, not the story that gave those leaders the authority that they were holding over us. And as a result, today we kind of find ourselves in the same situation, where if you are in a part of the world that does have a king or queen, I don't want to pass judgment, so I won't. But if you're not, and you're in a place like me, like the United States, we're kind of getting kings and queens now. They just happen to come in the form of a corporation. So it's still going to be someone at the top that claims to have an authority that comes from, up above. They're going to claim to represent our best interests, and they're going to use that against us. But there may be a better answer. There is a better understanding as far as I'm concerned. So I plan to share it with you. Then hopefully we can open it up to those who are even interested. Those who are like, yeah, either here's where you're wrong and this is where you can be corrected and so on and so forth. Constructive criticism. Or those who are also in the mode of a search. We can come together and start pulling our brains together. Be like the old school forums where it's just thinkers thinking together, bouncing ideas off one another, because that's when amazingly beautiful things have the potential to happen. That's when the next tier of understanding can be reached. I don't claim to think that that's coming from me. If I consider myself anything, I'd say I'd really like to be the American David Mitchell, kind of views the world slightly differently. Has a wife that's probably That's definitely going to be too good for him. I hear you, Dave. David? Probably don't like being Dave. But to specify, as the American David Mitchell, you just straight off the bat, you got to cut that vocabulary and education in half. And then you might still be a little bit too high. So maybe let's go for thirds, maybe a quarter. But, you know, I could care less. No, just kidding. Yeah. So it's going to be very uncomfortable. My hope, though, is by not trying to monetize anything, by not trying to sell you on an idea, by simply trying to share and try and do it as politely as possible, because I am a bit of a sarcastic asshole, so there will always be a sarcastic comment that's right there in my head just trying to get out. But I will do my best to keep that at bay. But I also don't want to be scripted. I'm not going to edit these videos because I don't want people to see somebody that looks refined. I haven't done much to myself. I took a shower and I'm now here in front of the camera. My hope is that by being as honest as possible and being as authentic as possible, I'll offend as little as possible. Because again, I'm not here to stir the pot. Not a fan of the controversy. My hope is just to get the conversation started. I'm not smart enough to finish it on my own. As you'll come to find, I'm really good at tripping at finish lines. But I'm pretty good at starting. My hope is to start. Hand it off to someone else who's better at it than I am. But, yeah. So I do appreciate anybody that does come here to listen. I recognize that we all have a limited amount of time. Hopefully we can make tomorrow slightly better than today. Hopefully we can become slightly better tomorrow than we are today. But again, I feel like that clock is ticking and we don't have a whole lot of time to make a difference. But I do believe that it is worth the effort. It's worth taking those knocks, getting those hits. My hope is to give a better world to my kids. A lot of us out hear the saying, you got to prepare your kids for the world. Prepare your kids for the world. And I get that. But at the same time, can't we also kind of prepare the world for our kids? It's not that we get to change everything. We don't need to, put, corner bumpers on everything so that they're not going to hit their head. And that's not what I'm talking about. But the idea that we need to prepare our kids for the world is saying that, yeah, there's a lot of greedy, manipulative people out there. And you got to do your best to prepare them to defend themselves against these inevitable people that exist. Sure. But can't we also make the world slightly better where it's harder for those people to exist? Where there's less darkness for them to hide in? Where when they try and spout lies, it takes someone who's just being oblivious as opposed to someone who's trying to be a good person to fall for that goofy stuff. Yeah. So, it's going to be uncomfortable. Well, I guess the other thing I needed to say was that while it may appear as though I am saying bad things about the religious believers, again, I have to very, very clearly state that I came from a religious family. I myself was religious at one point. I know the creeds and the Our Fathers and the so on and so forth. I was a naturally curious kid, so I went with my friends to their churches. My real father, who left when I was 2 years old, was Mormon. So I have experience in the Mormon church. Gone to Baptist, Presbyterian, to Southern Baptist, to all over, Temple. I've been, no? I guess I've never been to Temple. Never mind, I take that back. I've not been to a temple. Nor have I been to a mosque. Okay, I guess I didn't explore as much as I thought I did. Definitely sticking into the Christian purview, I suppose. Yeah. Anyhow. What was I talking about? Oh, religion. It's going to seem as though I'm saying bad things about the religious believers. But I'm not. I'm merely trying to point out that the story The story that forms the religion, the religious group itself, might not be there. It is my understanding and my belief that the believers, the you and I of faith, are the best parts of any religion. Doesn't matter. I mean, unfortunately, we can also be the worst parts if we, completely throw out our own personal perspectives and basically become more and more fundamental. There's a higher likelihood of possibly doing not so nice things to one another. Brand new to being on the internet. I can't stand that I'm putting my face out there and for this. But hopefully it is for the better. But I don't understand how people talk so much without having drinks just constantly. Like, is there a trick? Do I have to, hide a lifesaver under my tongue or gargle with, lemon juice? I mean, I'm a smoker, so that's probably not going to help. We're getting off topic. You are the best part. I come from a Catholic family, and when I go back home to talk about anything having to do with my personal belief, a lot of the time I hear the reasoning that, the Pope. Look at the Pope. Things are getting better. Things are looking up. And while I do agree, I think that some people might be viewing that slightly differently than I do. And the Pope being more progressive is awesome. But who came right before him? Almost the antithesis of progressive. Someone who was a fan of fancy shoes, a fan of appearing a certain way, someone who, I might be misremembering this, I guess that's, a personal bias, but I don't recall very much smiling. So not someone who was beaming with happiness. It was a representation of more the old ways of religion. But why did they change? It wasn't because he passed away. It's because they recognized that the people, the yous and I's of the Catholic Church, weren't going to accept that for very much longer. That was actually making it harder for us to follow their lead. So they had to make a change. And the change that they made was to basically make up for the mistake. And so they had to put someone that you, the believers, the best part of any faith, especially in Catholicism, because I can personally speak to that, could offer. But they had to keep you. So they gave you something that was more in line with your own beliefs. It's not because suddenly the word changed or suddenly there was some, message that came down on a beam of light and then, message received, we're changing. It was, message received from you, the people. And it's awesome. It was a great change. I'm not saying that it was a bad thing in any way, shape, or form. But it wasn't them that chose it for it to be. It wasn't religion that decided. It was you. You made the Catholic Church better. But unfortunately, it's not something where we have that direct effect where we can change something. That was because they recognized that they were losing the numbers that they wanted and so on and so forth. In my personal opinion, I should say. So, they made the good decision as far as a business or a corporation is concerned. You need a new mascot. Okay, done. This is the new face. And it is a good change, by all means. That's a better example for people that are using this as an example. Also, you're going to recognize that my teeth are messed up. Yes, I am a veteran, and since my service, I started grinding at night. And I used to have amazingly beautiful teeth, going to the dentist and they'd be like, ooh, look at those, no cavities and so on and so forth, way to go. But man, I started grinding so hard all the time. My wife complains about it constantly, less so now, but definitely towards the beginning of a relationship. It was a cause for concern. But I essentially just finally got through that hard candy shell to that gooey center, and then everything went from there. but it is on one side. It is goofy looking, but yeah. We are all here to do what we can, the best that we can with what we have. I have this ugly mug. I have these jacked up teeth. I have this opinion. I have this perspective. All of which you get to see, hear, or listen to. Guess you can't listen to my teeth. So, you're probably the luckiest of all of us. Man. But it is going to be a lot of oversharing. As I said, I feel as though there's a countdown. And I keep hearing this stupid voice in my head that says, if not you, who? If not now, when? And I really want the answer to be someone else. Someone else, but also right now. Someone else that has the ability. Someone that has the talent to bring people together. Someone who has that charisma. Who's already built up their name, their recognition. Someone who could be a good leader. Someone that would lead from the front. And they're out there. Man, there are so many people that I'm inspired by on a daily basis. As far as a great leader, I mean, they're all over the place. But even not as leaders, Greta Toomberg, holy shit. There's somebody who was a kid, and a more mature kid at the beginning, but a kid who basically raised her voice and stood up against the world of the most powerful people, those who are in control. And she said, hey jackass, maybe you could stop. And I don't doubt for a second that ever since she went viral, there have been offers upon offers upon offers. Come join our side. You need to come and you need to make the narrative change for our benefit. We'll pay you whatever you want. And she's been turning it down as far as I can tell. I don't know her. I'm not a weird stalker and I haven't been keeping track. But each time that I hear anything about her, I'm just like, fuck yeah. Way to go. Ugh, it's great. So there are amazing people out there. But on my other channel where I'm focused very much on the American manipulation, I talk a lot about being in a metaphorical car and how we're all stuck in that car together. And people are convincing us that we're not, that we're actually in separate teams and we should be opposing one another. That's true with us, with humanity. This is our world. This life is our chance. We should make the best of it, not just to have the greatest experiences that we can have, because that's only thinking of half of the equation, but to create the world that we all want to live in. Nobody wants to be robbed. Nobody wants to be randomly shot by a stranger. Nobody wants to get in a car accident. We all make those same mistakes. But what if we lived in a world where things could be solved because they were a problem? Where when there was something that was happening, we were all stepping up to help. Too good to be true. And right now, absolutely, I agree. That is too good to be true. That is a pipe dream. But it's because we view the world through the eyes of someone who is trying to manipulate us. Someone who is trying to use us as a resource. So it does sound too good to be true, because everything has a price. There's always going to be someone there that wants to take advantage of you. Thus far, absolutely. Can it get better? I think so. But it might not be so easy. It's gonna suck. But it is worth it. It is one of those things, like the hike up to the most magical vista, the most beautiful scenic view where you can see just amazingness. But it sucks to get there. It will suck. We're going to get scratches and bumps and bruises. We might even twist an ankle. We might even lose someone in the way or along the way. But if we all work together, we can all know which direction we're headed, so that when we do start to lose people, they also have the ability to find their way. It may not be the path that we took. That's fine. We may take hundreds of different paths to get to the vista. That's okay. But the idea is that the vista is what we're all shooting for. It's what we all want. But it is being held at bay right now. Being held at bay by certain narratives. Certain narratives that begin with one narrative. Something that told us that there is a plan. That we are mere cogs in this plan. We have a purpose. And now, I want to say, you do have a purpose. Your purpose is to grow, is to develop, is to advance, just as all things do, just as life does. This is the overriding plan. Progress. Progress. Grow. We can. We do. But something is inhibiting our growth, both as individuals and as people. A people. But it's okay. There is a solution. And it's not going to require any violence on our part. It's just talking, thinking, and understanding. So, this is the beginning of that adventure. This is the beginning of that hike. My name is Zed. Let's get it done.